we went through some phases in our group, and I'm just going to highlight those phases. Then I'll ask Maurice to reflect on what he... Oh, thank you. That tipping point for the flowers there, we don't want... I think the 4 phases were, and then I'll ask Maurice to speak to what he heard at all 4 phases, and then I'll do the same briefly. We started with some inspiration. We were helped by, for example, we had 3 presentations of ideas of what's possible. We then made the very important next step that you have to go through, which was candid pushback, and I'll say, in particular, people expressed fears. Okay, we were, remember, about value chain transparency. So that's an inspiring thing, and it's also a fear-generating thing. And we had the inspiration, but then people, thankfully, came forward with candid expression of fears. We then discussed, frankly, pretty briefly, some, I would say, practical reassurances. Okay. Sorry. And there were literally times then in the discussion where people spoke up and said, okay, if you're telling us this and that, then I feel that this could be a positive way forward. And there was this that was the tipping point, basically. Then everyone started dancing. And the dance was pretty left brain. It was detailed, constructive input, raising a question or a concern, and talking about, let's document the concern and are there practical solutions? So I'm going to say the last one was basically, I'm going to write down nitty-gritty, if you like. Okay. And I captured 5 PowerPoint slides full of nitty-gritty that I'm happy to share with the organizers. But Maurice, tell us about your...
Is it on? Yeah. So first of all, we all held our presentations, and I'm sad that Michael left because he had a bundle of creative ideas how to make transparency in general. And then I had my presentation about transparency, and I was quite happy that in the speech of Daniel Goleman earlier this day that he mentioned Good Guide, because my project is a bit similar to this. The We Green project tries also to give transparency to a lot of consumers, so as much as possible, and to make it like a funny toy, so that the people are really liking using it. Like he described that his uncle, or his son or something, scanned his toy and said, okay, there are unhealthy ingredients or stuff like this. We tried to do something similar, but not on the product level, because there are not enough data right now. So we decided to collect company data, and there are already a lot. So we collected CSR rankings and all that stuff, and connected that to the products. So always when people are using, for example, Barku, that's a software in Germany, scanning products, and then they get some kind of traffic light system and see this company behind that product is green, yellow, or red. After my presentation, we get to the second part, fears, so that is clear. A lot of companies don't like this level of transparency, even if it's not really controlled. But then we said, I mean, that's the dynamic of transparency, and otherwise it wouldn't work. I agree that there are problems, so that there is no real control or no systematic framework, not just according to product carbon footprint or life cycle analysis, to all topics, to all sustainability topics. There is no meta institution that's ruling you have to do it like this. So I think that there are 2 ways, and there we come to the next point, how that could work out. And I would say the good thing is in this dynamic approach, it works quite well if we reach a critical mass, so that a lot of users, maybe user-generated data, or several systems with life cycle analysis are collected or work together and make their systematics transparent, then that can grow. And so it could go into the chaos direction, but it could also go to a very good direction. And imagine what happened with Wikipedia. That worked quite well. And I had the feeling, the problem also here is that the most people here talk about hard numbers, and Jakob said this earlier this morning. From the consumer perspective of view, they don't care if it's hard to calculate a PCF. They want a result. And that's what we definitely could measure with our tool. We see that a lot of consumers are interested in these topics, and we handle it like this. If there are no informations, you get a red. If there are at least some information, so if there is reporting, you get yellow. And if there are informations enough to compare, then we see which ones are good or not, and then maybe you get green as a company. So that was what I learned from the session was getting good into the details, but we should face this second part. So the consumers, if we want to reach a lot of consumers, we keep it simple, and it should be funny. So it should be like a tool that the people really like to use. That's what I learned.
Okay. I could try and really quickly share a few more thoughts that came from the group. As I say, we've got 5 slides here, thanks to some really good. No, I'll spare everyone that. I'll just capture a few pieces of input. The basic fear that the data can become used in ways I didn't predict, and I'm giving away data, and I lose control. There were many other problems. The other big one is we need to be able to assess the validity of data sources. There were other concerns that really come in the nitty-gritty section. I think the key practical reassurance is if we can define a system where the publishers of the data retain the ability to pull it back and also have an ability to designate who gets to read it, and if there's a rigorous assurance process to the data put into place, I think those are the ingredients that were seen as key to move us from fear to, okay, then let's roll up our sleeves and talk specifics. I'm tempted to really ask our other members. I'm just going to touch on one example of there was a lot of good input. I'm just going to touch on one example of the kind of input we had. One of the inspiration items up here is machine-readable data, making data usable by computers and algorithms and usable by folks who weren't involved in creating the data in the first place. A participant pointed out that in order to do that, you need what are called ontologies. We need to agree on terms so that algorithms can share data. And then we had a nice discussion in the group of different programs underway right now. One in ISO, another one sort of US-based, that are actually developing these kinds of terminology standards. And there's the hope that they come together, and we were able to inform the participants about that. And there were many other sort of nitty-gritty topics, but I think we'll just put those in the minutes.
So Robin and I were facilitating a group around engaging with supply chains and what are the best ways to engage with your supply chain and how to get the best results from this engagement. And those are our results. First of all, we started off asking, before we did anything, before leaving the presentations, we asked the members who are here, what is it you were hoping to talk about at this session? And we got back some a massive variety of questions. I'm going to read some. How to approach supply chains in general. What are the best mechanisms out there for engaging with your supply chain? How can initiatives talk to each other? We've got multiple initiatives going on. What are the ways that we can get them engaging with each other so that we minimize burden? The difference in communicating with your suppliers, the difference in communicating with shareholders, differences in communicating with consumers. We also talked about the problems of getting quality data from the supply chain, especially when you're looking at international supply chains. Everyone's going to be at different standards or different places in assessing their carbon initiatives or the carbon footprint. We also had experience of public procurement for those of you from the public sector and how much more difficult it is for them to engage with their supply chain. And key to this is knowledge sharing. What's out there to facilitate knowledge sharing when it comes to supply chain engagement? Okay. Then we went into 3 presentations, and I'll give a quick overview about what I and the orange person talked about, and Robin can talk about what he presented to us. Orange did a... So Orange isn't here, unfortunately. They got stuck in Paris or France because of the train strikes. So if anything's said publicly about what I'm about to say about his presentation, it may not be completely true. Needs to be cleared. Orange have done, from his presentation, a 10-year carbon labelling scheme for their mobile phones. One of the key threads that I picked up from his presentation were that it takes a long time to get good quality data, and they've had to revise their methodology twice, but they're at a place where they're rolling out their scheme and the carbon footprint labelling across different countries. So they're at a stage where they feel confident enough that they can move forward, and that took them 10 years. Collaboration is key with their supply chain. They work really hard to engage with their suppliers and to bring all the data in. What else did Orange say? So they had multiple criteria. It wasn't just carbon. They also started reporting on the water impacts, recycling, and other sustainability. Maybe not social sustainability, but other aspects of sustainability. And they also, because they were seen as a leader in this field, they're starting to collaborate and inspire their competitors. So, is it SCF? SFR is their main competitor in France, and they're actually sharing their standard with them, and they're working together to make sure that the good practice they've developed isn't lost, and that the people that buy the phones aren't confused. They're also doing O2 were also inspired in different countries. Okay, I can talk about my presentation now, and that's a lot easier. My presentation, what CDP does, and for those of you who don't know, Carbon Disclosure Project, it's a charity that collects data. We love data. We collect it from companies, and we like to boast that we've got the largest database or registry of voluntary climate change information in the world. 3,000 suppliers disclosed to us this year, and we've been going for over 8 years. I mainly talked about our experiences in engaging with supply chains through our members, and it was about engaging with your tier 1 suppliers. What are the important critical success factors for us? It would be common questions, getting as many authorities together to ask the same questions, making sure the timing stays the same annually, and having people on the ground in different countries to really help out those suppliers who are new to this agenda. It could be developing countries, or it could just be language barriers. It depends, but you do need people on the ground there. And so we talked around those experiences. Talk about yours?
All right, yes. So I positioned slightly some of the advances we've been making with the voluntary labelling scheme as one of the motivators and as the experience base for what we've been doing. So I gave a quick update on on where we were with that, and particularly in an international context. And then I focused down on the issues associated with the questions in particular. So we looked at what would be a definition of success. How would you define if you've successfully enabled the exchange of information? And I proposed a definition that the number of supply chain product carbon footprints was 1 or 2 orders of magnitude above the number of LCAs that have been completed today. So trying to say that we're looking for some massive scalable deployment would be a measure of success of overcoming these challenges. And then we looked at some of the barriers or some of the enablers for that. So what would be the 2 enablers? One would probably be to increase the amount of primary data that's captured and managed by suppliers all the way up the supply chain. And this is where mechanisms like the CDP process, we looked at ways of trying to motivate people just to assemble the basic primary data in supply chains, in suppliers, in other countries all around the world. How do we build up this basic inventory, or getting companies just to assemble the primary data, recording their energy use? Just think of it in their own areas, because that basic first step will enable people to start asking questions. It's the beginning of a journey, and if you can start to encourage people to do that, it's going to be easier to get the data from them later on as the number of requests go up and as we start to search further and further up the supply chain. Yeah?
Yeah, I think that covered a good 20 minutes. Then we did some deep dives. So what we did was we opened it out to everyone in the group, and we asked if they'd like to do breakout groups or just have one big discussion. And our lot were so outspoken as one big discussion was the best way forward. So everybody came together to really talk about what are some of the issues they faced going forward in their day-to-days. And the first one is how to achieve volumes. I mean, we talked briefly about getting more LCAs done. I've talked briefly about getting more companies doing primary reporting. And one of the things that was brought up as an idea to solve the problem of getting greater volumes is including industry associations that can help set standards, but also collect some sector-based PCF LCA data just for some of the basic commodities, so that when those who are trying to do their supply chain assessment, if they come across some very difficult sectors for collecting information, especially if there's a lot of barriers such as commercial sensitivity, they could be used as a sort of a stopgap. Examples were CFIC, CMA for the chemical industry, who have actually been working on this, and it was actually suggested that 2 to 3 years' time they may have something to use for people. We also mentioned using databases such as the ELCD as a temporary way to give companies confidence, just so they could keep their head below the parapet. Do you have anything to add to that? No? Okay. Then the next one was a common theme for everything we discussed all day today. Must use common template, collaboration. Virtually every problem that we identified could be overcome with proper collaboration. And we were musing afterwards that it sounds really simple, but it's actually really tricky to do. At CDP, we bring together 434 investors, 57 companies, and some, governments for fun. And getting them to agree on anything is very tricky. But the way to solve every problem we had was about collaboration. And it was actually mused that we have some amazing thinkers in this room. And if we take away from today the idea of collaborating with each other, we've been swapping business cards, let's not file them away, let's get some knowledge sharing going, because that's the only way we're going to go forwards on properly engaging with suppliers. Do you want to do the last one, or shall I? Okay. Water? No. And then the last point, and this is actually a very good point that neither Robin nor myself mentioned in our presentations, which was developing countries may end up being penalised. Because I talked a lot about deselecting suppliers based on low carbon performance, because it's something that our members at CDP were discussing. And that could have massive impacts for developing countries who are going to need extra support and aid to get through this process and to build up their carbon capabilities. Is there someone here from GT Corp? GTZ? Hello, this man is engaging with Africa at the moment. So it's actually been going on, and that's something that we probably want to keep in touch with. Anyone that's assessing their international supplier base will probably want to keep in touch with those charities that are engaging with developing countries or countries at the beginning of carbon assessment on the ground, because it's a very difficult process to do. The last thing we said, and it's kind of...
I mean, on that point, I think to be a bit more give a bit more clarity to that, we were saying that it's an issue of access, and therefore some of the developing countries might feel they cannot engage and therefore be excluded from the markets because they haven't done product carbon footprinting. And when we were looking at issues and barriers, motivation was considered a barrier, and we thought that this fear of exclusion would be a motivator. But the reality is that it's not actually a problem if you can provide the access. So actually doing the work, creating the inventories in the developing world is not a problem, but they need help to do it. So provided we provide aid and assistance for developing countries to assess their inventories, it should not be a problem, it should not be a barrier, because it's not intrinsically difficult. So it's important to balance those two things. And I think probably the last element of that was that, okay, we have this area where it's a problem, it's causing things to happen, but equally, I think the point was made that every time you go to a supplier, you also have to highlight the benefits of actually doing an inventory. The fact that you measure something will enable you to become, or give you the opportunity to understand what you're doing, and also therefore the opportunity to improve it, and therefore get an economic benefit from energy efficiency in the carbon space. So the benefit versus the motivation in the third world was the outcome, where we thought you needed to have both sides of that argument.
Yeah, and we also discussed how it applied to every supplier. Any supplier you engage with, the first thing you have to do is think about it from their perspective, and it's what's in it for me. And if it's getting good quality data and working together to reduce carbon and their costs too, then that business case should write itself. And clear communications are the way forward for that. And again, collaborating together to take the best practice in communications with suppliers, supply chains, maybe business cases, templates, whatever that may be, that was core to increasing supplier engagement.
Thank you. And 2 words about what we talked about, and probably 20-odd words about what we concluded and what we wanted to take out of the discussion. So 2 words about, we talked about some best practice examples or learnings so far of communication to consumers around carbon and around behavioral change linked to carbon. And Tom brought us examples from campaigns, and Karina tried to distill those examples into a set of principles, which our first action out of the discussion group was to build those and share them with the group, and obviously we'll share them through here. Karina, do you want to? Oh, okay, that's it. I thought you were going to tell us what they were, but okay, I can't remember them all. Okay.
No, actually,
yes.
What we'll do is, what we'd like to do is share the principles. So there's something around principles around communication if we want to create behaviour change, and also there's something around what tone we should try and use in order to create best practice. And that goes beyond our group. So I think it's really important if we use those and then analyse them and comment on them, and actually try and between us all create some best practice ourselves that we can then take into our organisations or NGOs and try and live by, so that it becomes a shared experience, and then we can bring that back at the next forum and see how it's going.
Thanks, Karina. One of the groups that I tried to manage. My group were brilliant, but
we split into two groups.
It was a challenge.
Mine was a much better group than Tom's. They were the much better ideas.
We wanted to put some of this theory and talk into practice. So one of the challenges that I set our group was pretend that you're a retailer and the CEO has just asked you to come up with a bunch of ideas to promote a low-carbon diet to your customers, which obviously is quite a challenging behaviour in terms of people's supermarket shopping. So our challenge to the team was to come up with 10 ways that we could influence consumer behaviour in a supermarket to encourage our customers to live a lower carbon diet. So I'm just going to quickly run through the ideas that me and the team have come up with. If there's any supermarkets in the room, we might charge you if we see any of these ideas in your store, but here we go. The first one was around kind of menus and inspiration for kind of low carbon food and stuff you could put together, promoting vegetables in store and having a kind of pick and mix bag of ways to an easy way for people to pick up a load of veg and not have to pay a lot of money for it. Looking at rewards for low carbon purchases, so that might be kind of reward points and actually giving people extra points for not buying beef and buying veg instead, or maybe buying chicken over beef, and ways of financially rewarding people for it. We talked a lot about information and around how could you label the high impact and low impact things. Is there a sort of on-shelf labeling? Is there a sort of on-product labeling? Should it just be a CO2 impact, or should it actually talk about fair trade and organic and all those other factors that come into food purchasing? Choice architecture and editing obviously came into play as well. So should we be reducing the space for beef and increasing the space for kind of non-cattle food? One interesting one around kind of how do we make low carbon food items look delicious? If you look at what people like Whole Foods have done, they do a fantastic display in store of the fruit and veg, and actually they just make it look delicious, and they don't force home the environmental message, but they make it look really yummy and people buy it. We talked about kind of hampers we could put together and sort of help people put a basket of low carbon food together that people could buy up. We talked about making sure substitutes sit next to the high carbon products. So if we've got milk somewhere in the aisle, make sure the soy milk is next to it and not 4 aisles down. And I think that substitutability is a key part. Getting employees engaged and experiential stuff. So having chefs in store doing things and sampling, and the people that are stacking shelves help educate people. Was one. The number 10 we had was around a kind of sector approach. So actually, is this a bit too much for one supermarket to do? And actually, if you could get the supermarket industry behind this idea, I think something could be more powerful. And then we did get an 11th one because I had a special group who went above and beyond what we asked them. And they raised the important point about food waste. And actually, there's a significant amount of CO2 is produced by food waste each year, and that's something we need to tackle as well. So a very practical way, some might sound like crazy ideas, but kind of practical way that actually we can try and encourage behaviour change in the marketplace, and that was looking at low carbon diets.
Thank you, Tom. That's more than we expected. Well done. Very good, very good. And in our half of the discussion, because we split into two, our half of the discussion, we tried to focus on a small number of, rather than 11, a small number of key practical things that this community could do. This community that we've come together now for the 4th time as a product carbon footprinting community, perhaps some of the best understanding around the world of product carbon footprinting. What could we do to further the communication challenge that we know exists and the behavioral change challenge that we know exists? So we just brainstormed on that, and we have four things coming forward. One first was, let's call it a PCF Insights, and that was to build on the 5,000 or 6,000 or I don't know how many product carbon footprints that have been done around the world over the last few years, to pull out not just the data but the insights, so that we have better understanding, perhaps category by category or practice by practice, of what we've learned. So are we now at a point where we can take some PCF learnings not about how to build a standard or how to define capital goods in or out, etc., but about what does it tell us about changing behaviors. So there's some concept there about PCF insights. The second, which actually stimulated the first in a sense that was the first idea to come out, was actually PCF teaching initiative or teaching materials. It stimulated the first because if we had to teach what the insights were around that we've learned from product carbon footprinting, we'd have to make sure we understood them first. So there's some ideas built on something that Professor Goldman said on the video speech, which talked about building it into the curriculum in maths as well as in geology as well as in community, not just in science or geology or something, but building some materials based on our learnings that could be available for people putting together curricula around the world. The third one, let's call it the PCF Lighthouse Initiative. Lighthouse was mentioned as a beacon or a demonstration by which people can reference. Yeah? Some asked, who's our sort of Bob Geldof of the PCF world, or who's drawing attention to some of these topics, and who can be used to promote demonstration of living some of the behaviors and drawing attention to some of the behaviors that are drawn out of the insights. And several ideas were mentioned. There are examples such as Mumsnet or What's Watchers, which are video initiatives, television initiatives online, which demonstrate what others are doing or can do to bring some of this to life. The fourth one got quite significant debate before, and is perhaps a little trickier to handle, but you could call it a PCF policy debate. The topic of regulation to bring standards together, to raise standards as a result of the insight was brought up. How can, in some cases, we use standards for products to raise the level? And are there some categories for which this is more applicable to others? So we felt that there was an opportunity for a policy debate or regulatory to think about regulatory engagement and where that would help to make lower carbon consumption normal, and that probably would apply to some categories more than others of goods. And so those were the four: a PCF Insights, PCF Teaching Initiative, a PCF Lighthouse, and a PCF Policy Debate. There we had it. Thank you.